Hi everyone, welcome to Draw with Jan channel. In this video, I'm going to show you how to draw and color a pear. I have used Carand'ache color pencils for this. Try it with any color pencils that you have, preferably a pack of at least 48 color pencils. I took about 2 hours to complete this drawing. I have tried to cover it in as much detail as possible in this video. Hope you find this useful. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel for more videos. Let's get started. First, drawing an outline for the pear. Draw it as light as possible so that it's not visible later on while you're shading. Drawing slight curves here. Now drawing the stem. And finally, I'm going to lighten it up with an eraser because we don't want these lines to be visible while we are shading. Now using a yellow colored pencil for the first layer of shading. As you're shading, pay attention to the highlights. Leave those areas blank. Also, make sure not to apply too much pressure because this is just the first layer of shading and we're going to add many more layers to this. Now using a light shade of green for the next layer. I'm mostly using vertical strokes for the area closer to the outline. Using yellow again to just blend the colors smoothly. Back to light green for shading the rest of the area. Please note that we are not coloring the entire area green. Pay attention to the highlights and pay attention to the shadows and make sure you're following those patterns while you're shading. Now using dark brown to define the shadows in the drawing. This is going to be the first layer of shading for the darker areas, so make sure not to apply too much pressure. Observe the reference picture carefully for all the dark portions and shade accordingly. You can draw the outlines first to help you mark the areas for your shading. However, make sure not to draw harsh outlines anywhere because it can take away the realism from your drawing. Using green here to blend in the shades so that the outline is not too harsh. Also notice that this is a darker shade of green that I'm using for the next layer of shading. Follow the same pattern. You can define the outline first and then use lighter shades to blend in the outlines with the inner shading. For the darkest areas, I'm using black for the shading. The dark shading in your drawing allows you to bring in the depth in the drawing. Follow a simple rule: whenever you have a darker shade, make sure you blend it in nicely to give it a smooth finish using a lighter shade of color. Pay attention to the small details in the drawing. That really makes a difference. I'm just adding another layer of light green shading to the drawing. We had originally used yellow and then light green for our first and second layer of shading. However, you can see the difference here when we are adding the next layer of shading. It definitely adds to the richness of the color. I'm now adding layers for the darker areas. Remember, the trick is in blending the colors smoothly so that the dark shading does not appear as a separate patch of color. If you notice, I'm just repeating the same process over and over again, drawing an outline and then using lighter shades to blend in the colors neatly. And as you're doing this, remember not to apply too much pressure, otherwise you'll not be able to add layers to your drawing. From now on, as I'm shading, I'm going to try and bring out the highlights and shadows more clearly. Look for the dark and light portions in your reference picture and shade accordingly. For the darker areas, instead of directly applying the dark shade, try layering, and it can definitely produce better results. Defining the outline more clearly. I'm either using dark brown or black to define the outline, depending on how dark it is in the reference picture. And as you're defining the outline, blend it in. I'm using a circular motion mostly for shading the inner part. Also, take your time to shade. I am actually shading much slower than this. I've just increased the pace of this video. More time you spend on it, the better your results are going to be. Using a darker shade of green now. Just repeating the same process all over again. Take your time to observe your reference picture very carefully to know where to shade dark and where to shade light. As soon as I'm done with a darker shade, I always like to use a lighter shade to blend in the colors. I'm now using dark brown to mark the spots in the outer layer. You should be able to do this easily if you didn't apply pressure previously while shading. Otherwise, you will realize that it's going to be difficult to mark these spots. I'm also using green or a lighter shade of brown in a few areas to define these spots. Since this is going to be the last part of your shading, apply pressure if needed. In the next few seconds of the video, I've just shown you how I've gone about defining these spots. Moving on to the stem. Define the outline first. I have used 2 or 3 shades of brown for this and black for the darker areas in the outline. Now for the shadow, I'm going to use green, grey and black mostly. First beginning with a layer of green, using grey for the edges and black for the area right underneath the object. Between the black and the grey shade, I'm going to use a darker shade of grey to blend in both these colors. You would have noticed that I left a tiny white space there while shading the area around it in black. The object is placed on a surface, and just drawing the shadow properly can make such a huge difference to your drawing and make it look so real. Finally, I'm using white to blend in the colors smoothly. I'm now adding some finishing touches to the drawing. You could choose to stop at this point. However, I do think that the last few minutes that you spend on your drawing, trying to define as much details as possible, is what really sets it apart. And finally, I'm going to define those spots more clearly.